After launch has done its job, the real work begins. The next economy won't be launched, it will be built in orbit. The Pentagon takes years to build what China develops in months. Startups create breakthrough technology that the military never buys. And somewhere between research labs and the battlefield, innovation goes to die. But what if the problem isn't the technology, it's the system itself? Colonel Eric Felt spent his career inside that system, leading the Air Force Research Lab in New Mexico, shaping Space Force acquisition at the Pentagon, and watching brilliant ideas get crushed by glacial budgets and endless bureaucracy. Today, he's breaking down exactly where the process breaks, and more importantly, how to fix it. From the valley of death that kills good tech to why China's central planning can't beat American chaos, to the one thing that matters more than speed. He'll reveal why the Space Force needs a Tony Stark acquisition model, what Golden Dome really means for the future of space defense, and the uncomfortable truth about peacetime that's making us vulnerable. If you're building space tech, working in defense, or just want to understand how America can actually move fast enough to win, this conversation will change how you see the entire system. Let's get into it. My name is Jason Canigan. I'm the founder of Cold Star Technologies, and I wanted to find out what is really going on in space and defense. So I started interviewing experts in the field, and over the past number of years have met with over 150 academics, engineers, business owners, venture capitalists, military, and government officials. I call this effort the Cold Star Project, and it's where you'll ride along with me to find out what is really going on in space and defense.
All right, Colonel Eric Felt, recently retired from the United States Air Force Space Force, past director of the Air Force Research Lab, New Mexico, and then moved to the Pentagon to look at purchasing and supply chains and that, and really interested in hearing that. So you've been on a couple times before. I appreciate you coming back and updating us about what's happening. I think this episode, this interview, will really pair well with Mike Browns, who was first head of the Defense Innovation Unit, and one of the new format, ones that I've done this year with these great openings, right? That take a long time, people, to put together. It's sometimes 7 hours to get that thing all done with the clips and everything like that. So I'm really interested in what you have to say about the purchasing philosophy with the DoD, what's changing, what you found frustrating. So, as I mentioned, you led the AFRL Space Vehicles Directorate in New Mexico, and then later worked at the Pentagon in procurement, supply chain, and that. From where you sat, where did innovation go missing between research and acquisition? Let's start with that.
Sure. Well, first, Jason, thanks for having me.
Sure.
I think a third time on your show.
Yeah.
I had a great time talking with you in the past on these things, and you continue to up the bar on your intro to the show. So it's certain to capture
Thanks.
attention, and I always love to see what you're doing next here and what your guests have to say. So I guess my first thought on innovation and the way we're doing it in the DoD and in the Space Force, with which I'm most familiar, is that it's alive and well. The basic process I see is working just as it should in terms of the steps that we want to see and the steps that happen. And what I mean by that is that you have a lot of ideas that get tried out at very early stages, and then some of those work out and some of those don't. And then you have a smaller set of ideas that get more experimentation and more development. Some of those work out, some of them don't. And then you have a continual refinement of the ideas as you move towards programs of record and actually delivering military capabilities. And that's how it should be. So the point is, the Valley of Death is a good thing. It is a natural filtering of a lot of ideas that might be neat technology, but are maybe not among the most useful military capabilities. And you have to think of it in terms of what the alternatives are. Because if you have one particular piece of technology that costs $1 billion and gives you a 1% performance improvement, that does have military utility, but not nearly as much as something that costs $10 and gives you a 10% performance improvement. So I think when you're on the side of the service and acquiring these things, that the bang for the buck is what's really important. And the natural filtering that happens from the many valleys of death along that process is as intended. Now, that said, I do not think that we are doing things in a totally optimal way in terms of the criticism that I often hear that's super valid is the speed of the process. Okay, so yes, the Pentagon eventually makes the right decision, but it takes them so darn long. Why can't we accelerate that process? And so a lot of our efforts in both AFRL and in the Pentagon at SAF-SQ, we're focused on accelerating the innovation process, finding the best ideas sooner, and then pulling those forward. But it's not about bringing every idea across the valley of death. It's about trying to identify the ones that are going to have the highest impact and bringing those over. The other thing besides the speed that often heard criticized was, why is the process so chaotic? I don't know who to talk to. I don't know, how to navigate all of this. And I guess what I would offer is that the innovation process if it's working right, is inherently a pretty chaotic process, just like capitalism. I mean, it's the best ideas in the economy come about from people trying something, and maybe somebody buys it, somebody they don't, and then somebody else tries something, and that free market process is a little bit chaotic, but it works really well in terms of fleshing out the best ideas and using the natural demand signals rather than some kind of centralized planning process. So innovation that works well is going to be inherently chaotic, just like capitalism is a little bit chaotic process. And so speed, we want to fix that. Chaos, I don't really want to fix that. I want to embrace that and make sure that we're using that to make sure to get the best ideas across the finish line without trying to over-regulate. It is just not a linear process where you can say, this is what I want at the end, and therefore I need to go back and be doing this basic research right now. Nope, does not work that way. And so understanding that is, I think, one of the key lessons learned for those that want to embrace innovation. So what do we do to make things so chaos? I say embrace it. Faster, I say let's work on that. What are some of the things that we did to try to make things faster that worked? First of all, early operational experimentation was invaluable. And so what I really liked when we were at AFRL was putting some of the new companies into these accelerators. And one of the neatest things about the accelerators was they had to go talk to 100 potential customers. And rather than work on your technology, which is what they want to do, they got to go and find these customers. And it was super valuable. And they always pivoted to some other different idea during this accelerator than what they thought was going to be of value. And so that process was really good. So early ops experimentation. It was also really good for the operators to see all the potential ideas that were out there, because it helped broaden their thinking. Oh, I just don't want a faster horse. Maybe I actually want, Model T Ford kind of thing. So it was very good. This early ops experimentation was key to bridging the valley of death for the most successful programs. Second thing that I found worked really well was analysis, ops analysis, that you can take a potential technology and you can war game it in different operational analysis scenarios, and you can measure its utility. And so if you have, one more F-35, that creates, a 1% advantage in a particular scenario that you're analyzing. And if you have, one new piece of space technology, that creates a 2% operational advantage. That's exactly the kind of stuff that I found was good at convincing people that the bang for the buck was worth it on some of these things. And then we started several new programs with good ops analysis, and we're not doing enough of it. So that was a key thing to getting across the valley of death too, was translating it to military utility in a mathematical way when possible. And it's not just pure math, but when possible, using these ops research tools that are available to you is very effective, both for the technology and the people that want to push it, and again, for the operators to help them envision what could be out there. And then the last thing I would mention that I think is a key to success here is that I often found industry was ahead of the government in terms of their thinking about what the potential military utility of these things Sure, and that's okay. We want industry to be out there very forward-leaning and bold, and sometimes the government is slow to come around to understanding what the value of potential technology is. And when that happens and industry makes a big bet on something and they're right, we all win. And so rewarding some of those bets that industry takes ahead of what the government says they need was a really key thing. Now, there's risk in that because obviously sometimes industry isn't right about what's going to be valuable to us. But I would point to Starlink as an example of something that the government did not think was going to be viable or affordable or needed. And we were, SpaceX said, yes, you're going to love it. And guess what? They were right. They leaned into it, they built it, and we do love it. So that's one example, but there's a lot of examples where industry has been bold and leaned forward, even though the government wasn't there yet in terms of our thinking. We did eventually come around. So speed is the key thing to work on. And those are sort of three things that I've found that helps bridge the valley of death faster for the technologies that should bridge the valley of death.
Okay, excellent, excellent. There is a very large thunderstorm happening here, so if you happen to hear thunderclaps, that is what's happening. Although Zoom usually does a pretty good job of
I
screening.
thought you were just amplifying some of the talking.
Right, bang. So many things you brought up there. The first thing that I loved was get out of the building. Steve Blank would say that, right? Go talk to 100 potential users of this thing and find out the reality. Because if you stay in the tower or the lab, yeah, you've tweaked your technology, but it may not be useful. And I don't know about you, but I've been 5 years into this, and plus more than 5 years doing this show, talking to space startup founders, all of them, right? Okay, who's your customer? What's your use case? Oh, I don't know. Jason says get a customer. It got so frustrating, I wrote a book about it called The Evolution of Space Entrepreneurship that just came out. It's in Kindle and paperback format on Amazon. So if you're a space or defense startup founder and you want to know how do I attract venture capitalists, well, I went and talked to the venture capitalists, just like I'm talking to Colonel Felt here. Right, the people actually doing the thing and giving out the money and the grants and opening the doors. Right, what do they want? And I was surprised again not to hear you say dual use. I didn't hear that phrase come out. Maybe you're saving it for later. But that idea of bang for buck, how are we going to use this, and getting a reality check on what do people out there think of this, and then and I mean I know a lot of people stay away from this because it's scary. Nobody likes to be told you're wrong, right? Nobody likes to hear my baby, my beautiful idea doesn't matter to somebody else, right? But in business, we're not really running charities, right? We need reality. We need reality. We need use cases. We need buyers. We need customers who will actually put their money on the line and say, yes, we're going to go with that. So,
Jason, you know why I
yeah,
didn't mention
yeah,
dual use is
yeah.
because I have found almost all of these new technologies are potentially dual use. So it's
Okay.
not really something you have to strive for, but what you
Yeah.
do have to do is think about it, because oftentimes the commercial customers will carry you through the valley of death while you're waiting for your government customer to come around. But most of the technologies that I worked with at AFRL and in the Pentagon do have some commercial or uses in addition to the DoD things. So having the dual use is not as important as just embracing it and finding some of those commercial customers to help you through the lean times.
Okay. Very good. So I don't know much about your Pentagon job. I'm an operational excellence guy. I went to school for operations management. I was a factory manager when I was 25 and hated it, and went on to other things. But when you say logistics and supply chains and purchasing, I become interested. I want to know more about it. So I'd like to hear a little bit about whatever it is that you're allowed to talk about regarding the role. And let's talk about the threat landscape to supply chains, space supply chains. As after that, maybe I'll ask a question after you're done describing like what the role was like.
Sure. Well, there are a number of threats to our space systems, both on orbit and when you're building the system. And when you're building the system, the supply chain is of great concern, because there's a lot of different threats that can be known and tracked well, where are you sourcing the various components of the system? Or can you get enough of them? Can you be assured that they are of the quality that's needed? On and on and on. Now, we took a dual approach to managing supply chain risks. And basically, the first part of it is, okay, let's just apply good system engineering principles to the supply chain. And mostly the prime contractors who are building the system can do this themselves with a little bit of oversight to make sure that they are identifying their risks, managing their risks in a normal risk management framework and processes and risk matrices, all of that. So a lot of those supply chain risks can be managed with normal, what I would call the normal system engineering processes. But I think the risks that we face to the supply chain are the unknown things that we that we don't really envision happening, the sort of things that that could have a big impact, but you can't necessarily system engineer them out. And so what I think we liked to do about those risks was the same kind of ideas of managing them, but kind of at the system of systems level. So what I mean by that is, for a particular system, you're going to manage your supply chain risks by diversifying your suppliers. Don't buy all your stuff from China. Don't buy them all from any one place, but it's okay to have some sourced here, some sourced there, lots of different sources, and maybe have different kinds of components that can do the mission in case you have one kind of failure or identify a risk in any one of them. In fact, maybe you have different systems that can do that can do the same mission, and then that leads me to this idea that diversifying your supply chain for a single system, that idea can also be applied at the architecture level. And so a lot of what I was doing as the Director of System Engineering in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Space Acquisition and Integration was at this architecture level. How do you make sure that the various systems work together, both technically and programmatically? And how do you mitigate these common threats that might go across the various systems? And this idea of diversifying the supply chain also works at the architecture level. What I mean by that is, if you have several different systems or ways to get a mission accomplished, then you inherently have mitigated your supply chain risks, because if any one system faces any one supply chain risk, then the other systems may still be able to get the mission done. So think of SATCOM as an example. If you can use 4 different SATCOM systems, some of them commercial, some of them allied, some of them military, to communicate whatever needs to be communicated, then you inherently have a robust system, because if any one frequency is jammed, if any one cyber vulnerability is exploited that might be unknown ahead of time, any missile is shot at a particular satellite that takes out one satellite or a couple satellites, you still have a robust, resilient capability. So diversifying the ways that you can get the mission done, I think, is key to addressing supply chain risks, as well as the other threats that face our space systems. And that's the approach that we were attempting to take across each of the mission areas, was not just having one particular system that would get the mission done, but having a family of systems that could work together in a resilient way.
Okay. How often does the ITAR problem come up, where you've got some component that comes from another country and needs to come in here? And of course, there's always a potential problem with that. And that's really only the source of supply that you've got. Is that a rare thing or a pretty common thing?
Well, so ITAR was affected our ability to export systems to other countries. And the biggest impact that we saw to that was that our US companies were not always able to sell their products to our allies and partners as easily as we would like them to. So ITAR reform, which we've been through several rounds of it, was focused on making sure that we don't not handcuffing U.S. industry, and that they could sell their capabilities overseas. And so, for example, if they are building something that is the very state of the world and nobody else can do it, I mean, the very best in the world, and nobody else can do it, then maybe that needs to be regulated, but at least thought through. But if our U.S. industry is building the same kind of commodity items that are being built elsewhere in the world, then by all means we want to unshackle them to go compete and win business. So ITAR reform was important to make sure that the U.S. industries are robust and pursuing a wide customer base. So that was what that was. That was the greater concern I think that we had was when we had dependence on particularly on things that only come from one place like China. So, rare earth minerals, things like that. Those supply chains definitely need to be diversified. And there's lots of folks focused on how we're going to solve those type of problems. And so that is something. And the reason that that's such a potentially a big problem is that how I said we're going to have multiple systems and different ways to get the mission done. Well, if all those systems use the same, magnet that only comes from China, then you got a potential vulnerability across the system. So that's the kind of stuff that needs to be thought through. And again, some system engineering and risk management principles applied to diversify the supply chains and make sure you understand all the risks that we can understand. However, I'll go back to my first statement. I still think the greatest risk we face is the unknown risk that we're not able to envision exactly what it's going to be, but you can envision that something is out there that could affect us. And so building some flexibility into the system, some planning for using systems in ways that you might not have originally envisioned. Those are some of the techniques that can be used to mitigate against the unknown risks that might be out there.
Okay. This is the tough one, yeah, because you've got the known and unknowns right in that chart that Rumsfeld loved, right? The unknown unknowns scare me. And the thing is, the more you know, and the more of the known unknowns that you know, that's great. That sliver of the pie is getting bigger that you think you know about, but so is the rest of it, right? All those unknown unknowns are getting bigger and bigger and bigger too. So it's scary. The world you're getting into is bigger and bigger and bigger in that area. And I know even from one of the first conversations that I had with this show with Dr. Rick Fleeter from Brown University, university satellites were constantly getting screwed up by waiting for one item. And you can't test, right? You can't make sure the system all works together until you get that thing. And then what would happen is they would squish the testing period because the launch date doesn't move. You must get it on board the rocket to launch on that date. You have no time. And this would lead to a 40% failure rate at the time, right? Of satellites going up and just not working because of problems like this. So I think it's good. I think AI might be able to help in this area. Machine learning is probably with undirected learning, right? Where it is looking for things that you're not telling it. Go here and look at that. It's like more, here's the system. Tell me what I'm not seeing. Might be able to help in that area. So that could be fun.
Totally agree. And so one of the keys to that is you got to have your vendors expose their supply chain, to the AI engine so that the AI engine can mine it and find these things. And that's a fundamental need and doesn't always happen. And so that's something that you can't do risk management without knowing what those risks are. So there's a few things like that folks are working on that are important.
Okay, it might be a good use case for Nick Chaland's AI, because that's behind sort of a military firewall, right? It's much better than what Samsung found out. Put your business plan on ChatGPT and people could see it. So that I agree that's a big issue. Okay.
Yep.
When Mike Brown was on it, first head of the Defense Innovation Unit, he pointed out that the DoD's budgeting just made these glacial acquisition cycles. And then again, when I talked to a couple other guests, thinking Bill Connolly and our look at Freedom's Forge, and even most recently Colonel Nick Moran, the chieftain, where we looked at the interwar period and tank development, where everybody kind of designed up to 1938 with industry looking ahead a lot of the time. The bombers were all designed before World War II, which was a shock to me when I found that out. Because you see them and they evolve, but okay, this is what we can build now and then later. They were not taking 18 years to build a jet platform or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Where a kid is born and grows up during the whole cycle of this thing, right? So in your career, how often did you bump into these slow cycling budgets? And how did you find workarounds, if any?
a constant problem. So it's like the way I used to think about it is we're walking through molasses every day trying to get our mission done. And so what we at the headquarters were trying to do was warm the molasses up a little bit so that you can walk a little bit faster. But I think that's the way to think about it. And there's really a three-legged stool between the requirements process, the budgeting process, and the acquisition process. And people often talk about the acquisition process and how slow that is, but in my experience lately, that has not been the limiting factor in how fast we can go. It's the other two legs of the stool that may need some more work. And on the requirements side, what we would like to do is get to first of all, the workaround that people are using is starting the program without requirements. And there's now a few ways to do that, like middle tier acquisition, doing more in the lab, things like that, where you don't need a requirement to get started. So that's good. But what I think we really want to get to long term is where the requirements, like the JROC requirements process was originally intended to be, which is just give us some high level requirements. Tell it on one page, what does the system need to talk to, interface with? Those are the kind of things you really need the joint staff to be focused on, not 800 pages or even 100 pages of detailed system specs. So getting back to I think the original intent of the requirements process, which is you build your widget, but by the way, your widget needs to work as part of this bigger system, and focusing on the interfaces and a very short list of high-level requirements is the goal for the requirements process. And there's no legislative barriers to achieving that. So that's just something I think we need to continue to work through and through the Pentagon processes. So right now people are working around the requirements process. I think there are risks to that because sometimes you end up building the wrong thing, or you have to backtrack it and catch up to the requirements process. But simplifying the requirements process, speeding it up, making it more a high level is the long-term goal there. The budgeting process is often a barrier too, because if you want to start a program the normal way, then you have to, like 4 years ahead of time, inject your initiative into the POM process. You have to have done all kinds of analysis to show that how good it is and get it above the line in the funding process. And then it takes years before the money actually arrives. So that's not going to work. And that does not work in terms of being able to quickly respond to new threats and start new systems. And so the workarounds there that are pretty effective are, BTRs, ATRs, the quick start authority that the Congress recently gave us. Again, doing more in the lab, which doesn't require new start authorization, but you can extend the projects a little bit further. So I do think those are some of the ways that people have tried to get some money given to projects sooner than having to wait. But more reform is still needed there. And of course, there's a whole PPBE commission that gave some good recommendations out there. One other thing that I've seen people do is using, sometimes you can use O&M funds, which often have few restrictions on them, to do some experimentation, not to do product development. But by the way, if there's a commercial company out there that's done some product development and you just want to bring it in and evaluate it, that could be a legitimate use of the funding that you have. So people are very creative and are finding ways to do the best we can with the PPBE process as it is, but more work is needed there. And one of the simplest things, if we just had a higher BTR or a threshold, so that the department should absolutely be held accountable, but it would give us a lot more flexibility to move money around. I will say one of the things that was eye-opening to me was to look across the Space Force budget and the Air Force budget, actually, and look at all of the money that's potentially available in the year of execution. And there is a lot of it. Because a lot of programs, due to various reasons, are spending below their expected expenditure rates, and so there is a lot of money available in year of execution for potential reprogramming actions, and a bolder use of that, I think, would be a way to help with the PPBE process. But that would require, a little bit different dynamic in terms of the programs never want to give up their money, which is understandable, but sometimes they should be forced to. And then Congress needs to have appropriate insight into how what the department is doing with the money so that they can be held accountable. But that's really the key to PPBE reform that would mean a lot and may have a big impact. And then on the acquisition leg of the stool, done a lot of work there on how do we go faster with other transactions, with with cyber phase threes. That I think we have enough tools that we've been given in order to go faster, and even doing a traditional FAR acquisition in an expedited way, oral proposals. We have a lot of different ways that I think we can actually make the acquisition leg of things not the limiting factor in terms of how we get things done. So that would be my summary of the challenges that we face. But the warmer we can make the molasses, the better you're going to set free the folks who are trying to solve the problems within the department so they can run fast and work with the commercial providers to get those capabilities that are most valuable fielded.
Okay, great. I think I first heard of OTAs a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 now. So but that was a nifty idea.
It's great. Congress really wants to help us with this.
Yeah.
They've given us a lot of those tools, and I think just embracing the tools that we've been given. And the one other thing I would mention is that when you're going through a source selection on the government side, you often are being so advised by the lawyers and the contracting officials on how to avoid a protest that you're so slow and careful, and that's not in the government. That is not in the best interest of the United States to have that kind of a source selection process. So I advocate for a source selection process that is able to be a little bit less afraid of protests, and I do think that we should take a look at the Competition and Contracting Act and how easy it is for a losing bidder to lodge a protest, and whether that's appropriate in the age of great power competition. I don't think it is. If, for example, the government were able to continue executing with the winning contractor more often than we are now, and the default was not to come to a screeching halt and wait 9 months while everybody investigates and makes sure it was fair, I think that would better meet the interests of the United States in today's day and age. So that is worthy. Those type of things are worthy of some looks. How can we reform the contracting process to still be fair, but also to make sure that we're not slowing down the innovation and the capabilities that our nation needs?
Okay. Yeah, those rebuttals are interesting, and raising the criteria to be able to say lodge a complaint, like you say, and stop the whole thing sounds like a good idea.
It used to cost
every second place person is going to disagree.
Well, we used to have we used to joke that protest only costs 33 cents, but that's when the cost of a stamp was 33 cents. Now it's free. You just send an email. And again, we want the process to be fair, but if being fair makes it too slow to be effective, that's a problem. And that's kind of how I see where we are right now with traditional FAR acquisitions.
Okay.
Hey, quick message from Jason Gannigan, the founder of Cold Star Technologies and the host of this show, the Cold Star Project. I've been doing this for 6 years at this point, and if you look back through the playlists on the YouTube channel, you'll see I've talked to many different kinds of people related to the space field. And that includes venture capitalists, successful founders, subject matter experts, all kinds of people. And that has given me a really great perspective on what it takes to build and grow a real space business. I've also talked to many founders privately over the years, and startup founders who thought that the technological idea that their business was based around was what was going to give them the win. And I'm afraid that just isn't true. I mean, it's helpful, it's necessary, right? But it's not sufficient, okay? It is a component. And there is a lot more to building a successful space startup than just having a technical idea. For example, I've talked to many founders who had the idea, but when I asked them, who's your customer, they would get out their notebook and write that down. Like Jason says, get a customer. You have to know your use cases. And I've talked to all kinds of people. I've been doing this for 6 years now. You go back through the playlists of the Cold Star Project on the YouTube channel, and you'll see, for example, there's a whole season dedicated to talking to venture capitalists who invest in space companies. So you think we might know something? They might have shared something that might be valuable to you. So over the last year or so, I've put together a book. It's called The Evolution of Space Entrepreneurship. And if you are either considering becoming a space startup founder or are one and have realized, gee, there's more to this than I thought, you need this book, because it is all about these conversations that I've had with these subject matter experts who know exactly what it takes to build a real successful space business. You can see the cover. It's right here. And it's available on Amazon Kindle or in print. And I'm very excited about this book. I like it a lot. It's something that I'll probably never make my money back on in terms of the investment in it, but it needed to be made. So go over there to Amazon and grab your copy of this book, because it is going to teach you the elements of a successful space business, which, remember, go far beyond just the technical. All right, let's get back to the interview with Colonel Felt.
Okay. Anybody who wants to learn more about what Colonel Felt was talking about regarding the usage of certain channels of money, I encourage you to go listen to the interview with Mike Brown from a few months back, because we talked about the color of money. And money does have color in the DoD, and so and it's difficult to move things around in those categories. Once they're in there, it's kind of stuck. So that would be good. All right, well, let's move on to look at alternate acquisition models in space R&D. I'm guessing that you had some public-private partnerships and commercial approaches for satellite propulsion development at the AFRL New Mexico. Are there cases where those models did better than a traditional program, and cases where they fell short?
Yeah, I think one of the secret weapons that we have right now in the Space Force is a super robust commercial space innovation ecosystem that's going on, because they are doing all kinds of experimentation and risk taking that we can benefit from without personally investing every single dollar, government dollar, towards all this experimentation and development. So that is wonderful, and that's really how the key to how we're going to be able to deter China and stay ahead in all of this. So we've got to embrace that we've got to embrace and that commercial ecosystem. And the best way to embrace it is to buy stuff that works. You know, when somebody develops something and you test it out and you decide it's going to be really useful, then you should buy it. And then that rewards that kind of behavior. And then you can, we will get more innovation coming from the commercial. If we don't buy anything, then the whole thing's going to collapse, and that's bad. So my answer to your question is that the public-private partnerships and the commercial model wins every time. And so you can't, it's not always applicable, but whenever it's applicable, it wins every time. And so some of the conditions that make it applicable are, first of all, that the U.S. government is, cannot be the only potential customer for this technology. And so if that's the case, then you really get into a problem where, somebody is willing to develop something on their own dime, but then when they come to sell it to you, they're gonna charge you an arm and a leg, and you're not gonna be able to afford it, and you're not gonna be able to control the technology sufficiently. And so that if the U.S. government is gonna always be the only customer for this, that's a red flag. Doesn't mean that public-private partnerships can't work, but it's certainly something that you need to have a close look at. That's, as I mentioned earlier, that is almost never the case with the space technology that we're seeing today. There's almost always, other countries, other commercial uses for the technology, other customers other than the U.S. government. So that's usually the case that, this kind of supporting the commercial innovation model is a good way to go. The second thing, though, is that, it's probably not going to work well if you're really going after bleeding edge technology that's going to take 10 years to develop, because the investment timeline for the folks with the private equity and the private dollars is not going to be that patient. The patient capital is not there yet for the really big things, like think power beaming, moon activities, Mars activities. You see some of that from some companies, but it's usually, in general, the things that the U.S. government wants that are really long term and very exquisite are things that are not going to be conducive to this kind of exploiting the commercial innovation. So doesn't mean it can't work, but it's just another one of those things that you need to take a very close look at it. If you're talking about a very long-term exquisite development program, then that's a separate category of stuff. And then the third thing I would offer is, which is kind of related to that, is that you have to have some private capital available. So you have to have somebody interested in working on the technology and somebody with money interested in paying for the development of the technology. And that's not always the case either, but it often is. So with those three filters, I would argue that the commercial model is the way to go, and embracing the winners is the way to go. I call it I've joked a little bit, or tried to explain it as the Tony Stark acquisition model. So, in Iron Man, I mean, the development that Stark Industries does didn't have anything to do with the government. He went off and he built useful, interesting things. And if somebody goes off and does that, and then the U.S. government realizes, oh, that would be really valuable, then we should buy it. And when we do that, it rewards that kind of behavior, and it makes the whole ecosystem work. And so understanding it from the Tony Stark model is something that I think is helpful to people. I would assess that right now we are doing that a little bit, but we need to do it a lot more. And what I mean by it is buying the stuff that works and is valuable. If we buy more of the stuff that we test and works and is valuable, then we'll get even better behavior from the commercial ecosystem. So the answer is, it's always better as long as those conditions are met.
Okay, so this could be a real advantage over central planning.
I would pick this system over central planning any day, but the government's role in it is to buy the stuff that works.
Right. Now, this is a question that just occurred to me. With this current government administration on the executive side, there have been cuts in personnel in NOAA and other organizations and that. Have you seen that affect what you've noticed in the military? Are there fewer people looking at purchasing decisions in roles like the one that you had?
One of the most immediate effects that I've seen, at least in the Air Force and the Space Force, is that we were already critically manned in contracting officers in some of these fields that are the people that actually make the crank turn. And so if you slow down the crank, then you're actually making the molasses cooler. And that's certainly not as nobody's intent, but that is an unintended consequence, I think, of some of the cuts that have happened. And so I think we need to be very careful that we are implementing those cuts and those initiatives in ways that actually make the private sector and the commercial model more enabled rather than more stifled. So that just needs some careful thought and some careful implementation, because there have been some negative consequences. The Space Force lost a very disproportionate number of civilians to these things, and so we have to. If that makes the bureaucracy slower, that's a problem. I think the answer is that if you're gonna have fewer people in the bureaucracy, then you also need to have fewer rules and regulations that they are enforcing, so that each person can be more productive and go faster. And so I think that's probably the right way forward, but we got kind of some difficult transitions here, perhaps, as we work towards that.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Looking at it with my ops eye, it's, hey, if we're looking at industry for things that work and trying to figure out ways to implement them into what we're doing, we need eyes on that. If we have fewer people, it's not going to happen, right? Everybody's going to be too busy or doing some other role. How would you get somebody, I guess Congress funding that kind of thing, to see it as not bloat?
I think that is where we need some data. Okay, so we need some data on if actual contract award, if the time to award a cyber contract is getting longer, that needs to be tracked and something needs to be done about it, as one example. So data can help us direct resource. If we have fewer resources, that inherently is not a problem, as long as we're managing them in the most effective way to put them at these critical choke points. So that's my concern, is that we don't have, not necessarily collecting the data that we need to focus the resources on where they need to be. I'll tell you just another funny thing that we noticed in the, not really funny, but let me just say an observation that we noticed in the Pentagon is that when we stood up the Space Force, is that we stood up to be so lean and mean, and that was wonderful. But we didn't have enough people to go to all these meetings in the Pentagon, because we were sending majors to represent the Space Force when the other services sent major generals, just because we were so lean and mean. And so one of the answers to that was, well, I guess we need more people in the Space Force just so we can attend the meetings. However, perhaps a bolder answer is maybe the other services need fewer people in the Pentagon so that they also send a major to that meeting, and they can get some more stuff done, and maybe we have some fewer meetings. So I think if you think about it from a bigger perspective, the bureaucracy is, everybody tries to build up their own little piece of the bureaucracy so that they don't lose. But if you look at it from the top, you don't need or want all that bureaucracy. And so that's what I think they're trying to do within the Pentagon now, is streamline all of that. And if they're successful, that's going to be very effective at warming up the molasses.
Okay. I think I would make an awesome chief of staff. I think that would be an amazing role for me. And just thinking through what you've been talking about, it's like, oh my gosh, what officer level do we want these decisions being made at, right? Oh my goodness. And then of course there's the whole thing about it, as Tim Anderson reminded me more than once, a Navy captain is different than an Air Force captain, different than an Army captain, right? So some thought has to be put into there. And I know training is a real thing, right? Nick Moran and I talked about that in the last episode about his training to go to Leavenworth and find out, oh, how do you do this? How do you, act as a colonel, right? And issue orders for people to interpret that. And I was thinking, boy, isn't that covered lower down in the food chain? Like, huh? So,
well, over time, there's been
inside.
Yeah, over time, there's kind of been an escalation I think the ranks of the folks that are doing various things. I'll never forget a meeting I went to for the F-35. This was some years ago, but we had there was a 2-star general up there briefing on this particular problem with the tire and the landing gear and the various COAs to implement something. And I was like, wow, this is a super important program, and I understand why they've put so much focus on it, but that's probably been elevated too high.
Should a general be looking at this level of tech detail?
No, no is the answer. So, right. So those are the kind of opportunities we need to find to streamline the bureaucracy.
Okay. Well, let's talk about talent, recruiting, technical trust, decision making. I imagine you recruited a lot of researchers, and you certainly brought prototypes into being programs. I'd like to hear about some cultural or workforce challenges that you've encountered. I'm thinking probably more at the research lab, right, in this case. And getting senior leaders to actually trust each other and the process.
Yeah, a couple of things that I found that work well there. And the first thing is that the researchers need to understand operations, and the operations folks need to understand the research. And unfortunately, we have got kind of some barriers historically, in that the people working on the technology, they're not the ones out there using the technology, and vice versa. The people out there using the technology don't necessarily understand the development process. So it just was super effective when we had the technical people in in the lab or in the program office actually, go out in the field and do some operations or work with the operators. That was a big win every time. But the flip side of that is also true and probably needs some more attention, and that is bringing the operators into the labs and the SPOs. And so the Space Force, one of our visions there was to, basically eliminate AFSCs. So you're not going to have these specialties, and across your career, you can do some ops stuff, some acquisition stuff, and each person will have more diversity of experience. And so that's good in terms of an individual person's experiences. But I've also found that on a team, if you have a diversity of experiences on your team, you can accomplish the same thing. And then that still allows people to have some depth in their field. So for example, if you've got a team that has acquirers on it that have deep acquisition knowledge, operators with deep operator knowledge, finance people with deep finance knowledge, that diversity of experience on your team can be very effective too. But so get the researchers out to do some operations, get the operators in to do some to better understand research. That is a win-win, and that helps a lot with the transition. So that as a cultural thing, I think it's important that you should have your specialty, but understand that there are others with very valuable specialties too that you need to be best friends with, and you need to embrace and work together with them, not just with your own tribe. I think that's one of the cultural things that works that we're trying to implement within the Space Force. The second thing that I found is a problem with the culture is what I would call the tyranny of peacetime. We are not in a space war, thank goodness. And so it can lead to, complacency where people just want to continue doing things the way that they've always done them. They don't understand the need for change. Look what happened with the use of drones and counter-drone technology in Ukraine. All of a sudden, when you are in an actual fighting war, you realized how important this new tech and disruptive this new technology is. And wouldn't you like to realize that ahead of time? Well, that's where we are in space. We're not in a war right now, but if we were, we would find that some of the stuff that we're building is inevitably not the right stuff. And so the tyranny of peacetime is that it makes you complacent and not understanding the burning plank of needing to change and do some new things. And so the antidotes to that are, studying the threat, which I think we're pretty good at that. In fact, very good at that, I would say. Then war games and scenarios and training things that are realistic and with a thinking adversary. I think that has been super effective in the Space Force too to overcome some of this tyranny of peacetime. But we need to keep working on that and just instilling the sense of urgency in everybody so that they understand how we just can't be complacent and rely on the old systems and the old ways that we've done these things, because against a thinking adversary, that just a lot of that's not going to be effective. So just culturally, that's something that's something you have to be aware of and very proactively working on overcoming the tyranny of peacetime. And then the third thing that I think has been very effective and is a sign of a high functioning organization is what I would call embracing the hot wash culture. And the way I came to understand this was when I was doing I'll never forget when I was doing flight test work out at Edwards, and I went on my first sortie in an F-16, and we went up to test some new systems, and we came back down. And not only was there did the pilots have a pre-brief where they reviewed what we were going to do, after they came back, they had a super honest hot wash about what happened. And you blew it on the maneuver number 2 because I expected you over here and you were down there. And then then the other guy would be like, oh yeah, I was distracted by this thing over here. But just that honest feedback about how things went and how you get better, because lives depend on it, is something that the flight community is really good at, that I don't think the acquisition or the space ops community is as good at as we need to be. So embracing that hot wash culture, I think, is something that is an area that I've seen in high functioning organizations that should be embraced more widely, and culturally is something that's really good. I mean, all feedback is a gift, and the more diverse people you have on your team, the more potentially negative feedback you're going to get, but that's good because that's how we make ourselves better. And so I think culturally, that's an area where we may have some growing to do, but it could be really beneficial to improving our speed at which we can do things and making sure we're doing the right things, not just going fast in the wrong direction. So all of that I would wrap up into effective hogwash culture.
Okay, I like that a lot. Colonel Moran mentioned this. The United States military does not have a culture that permits failure. It doesn't like it, and yet I think back to Chuck Yeager or somebody like that, right? And in his era, with test pilots flying into the ground by accident. Look, really? Do you think they didn't talk to each other openly when they were doing that, right? So sometime in between then and now, things changed quite a bit and became maybe a little more ossified and I don't want to speak up and um, I
Yeah,
don't know, like
that's a culture that
yeah,
needs to be
yeah,
very proactively built, but it's really a great thing to be a part of when you're in an organization
yeah,
where you have enough trust that you can admit your mistakes, no problem. We're going to learn and not do that thing again next time. That's good. And we had that, in pockets within AFRL and other organizations that I've been a part of. But it's really neat when you can build that kind of a culture.
yeah. Yeah. Rather than looking over your shoulder, making sure the paperwork's totally filled out right and worried you're not going to be thrown under the bus, by, by someone you're working with, which, that can happen. So I'm curious if I made you, let's say I'm magically the president, although I don't qualify, but, and I made you the Secretary of Defense tomorrow, would you wipe out the current, acquisition processes and replace them with something brand new, or would you be more interested in tweaking what already exists to get the most out of it?
Well, I would double down on what's working,
Okay.
and we have a lot of stuff that's working well. Space Development Agency, the RCO, yeah, a lot of these rapid acquisition activities that have been happening in all of the organizations at SSC as well as others. Double down on things that are working well, and then and that's really the problem kind of fixes itself when you do that, because then the folks that need to go faster or very quickly learn they're not going to get any money if they keep stick with their old ways, and they're gonna reform and double down on that too. So no, do not throw the whole thing out. There's a lot of really good in the processes. I think they need to be streamlined, and they need to be run faster, meaning we're willing to take a little bit more risk in some of the processes because we have to. It's the only way to beat China. So I think that's the mindset that we're looking for, is not to don't throw out everything, but you got to fix it. And remember what I said earlier. The acquisition process is not necessarily the limfac in going fast, because you got these other two legs of the
Right.
stool that need some more work too.
Yeah. Good reminders. Always have to be brought up. Like, hey, don't forget about this. Okay. Well, good. Let's talk about there's a program called Replicator. Mike Brown had his fast follower strategy, which it's linked to. I put it up on my Google Drive, so it's linked to in the YouTube video description of that interview. Um, and the idea is low cost, attributable, mass deployment capabilities with fast follow-on upgrades, right? So if we could do that for space, a version of the Replicator initiative for space, what would that look like structurally? And is there anything in DoD that would need to change to enable it?
The way I look at that is we are already moving every mission that can be done in proliferated LEO to proliferated LEO, and that proliferation of smaller satellites in LEO is a version of Replicator. So for communications with Starlink and Starshield and everything that SDA is doing in LEO, those are Replicator-like things, and every mission area is implementing a replicator-like model in terms of proliferating their systems, because that's the simplest way, the most effective way to get resilience. It's not it's not sufficient by itself, but it's the first thing you need to do is to proliferate your system. And so we're already implementing a replicator-like model in all of the mission areas, but some are ahead of others. SATCOM clearly is ahead of everybody else in terms of what we're doing in LEO. Missile warnings shortly behind it. But an area that I think is ripe for a replicator-like model is on-orbit space situational awareness. So if you had instead of a few exquisite GSAP satellites, for example, let's say you had 50, 100, hundreds of small satellites that could just be looking around and seeing what's going on. You could get to the space situational awareness that we want. And really, the vision is of knowing everything of interest everywhere, all the time, in real time, is not unobtainable. The way that you obtain that is with the replicator-like model, having a lot of sensors in space and then fusing that information together using AI and all the tools that are out there so that you can maintain awareness on what's going on on orbit that is of interest. And you cannot protect our capabilities without that. So this SSA is ripe for a replicator-like adoption approach. Now, you've got commercial companies that are going off and working on this technology, and all the Space Force needs to do is embrace those and make sure that we use those capabilities and encourage those capabilities and shape those capabilities in useful ways. So I would predict that is the next mission area that's going to benefit from a replicator-like model. And I think that will be very advantageous to deterring conflict in space. Because, if you're the adversary and you've got it's like if you're a criminal and there's a Ring doorbell on every house, then it deters crime. Well, same in space. And so we need a lot more sensors so that we can keep track of things, but they don't have to be expensive, exquisite, traditional things. They can be a more replicator-like model.
I was just laughing to myself because I was visualizing T.S. Kelso's old Celeste track, which you can now see on other things, right? And there's already a zillion, satellites in orbit and more going up all the time. But let's assume somebody's listening and it's their very first space interview they've ever heard. So I'm going to summarize something really quickly. Satellites used to be for big governments only. They were gigantic and they were $1 billion. And you put a few up, usually in polar orbit. Now, a company like SpaceX deploys 60 of them in orbit perfectly. It doesn't explode, and it happens in 20 minutes. It's like from an OpEx standpoint, it's wild, right? I love it. And if one of those gets knocked down, or Jonathan McDowell, a Harvard Smithsonian PhD, puts charts of these up occasionally on his Twitter account, right? You'll see, the altitude of one satellite will drop, and sometimes they'll come back alive, a year later, 6 months later, whatever. And they have a limited lifespan. But if one of these dies or gets knocked out, it's not a big deal. If 30 of them get knocked out, it's not a big deal because we could just launch and throw up another 60 of them, right? And so that's what Colonel Fell is talking about here about, it's small, it's replaceable, it's distributed like distributed power networks. It's not reliant on one big power station, one big sensor or telescope or something like that. It's all over the place. And if you take a piece of it out, well, that's a minor annoyance. It's like getting bit by a mosquito, right? But it's not going to kill us, right? And we can replace that technology really quickly. Okay. I think that's very cool. All right. Well, let's wind up with a U.S.-China comparison. China does have rapid growth in space and defense manufacturing and technology and that. I think we're still leading in innovation, open collaboration, like you've talked about, and maybe even complex systems integration. Where do you see the U.S. maintaining or even growing its strategic edge over China over the next 5 to 10 years in the space field?
So I think you hit on three really important things there. And I would go back to doubling down on what is working for us. All right. And what's working for us is innovation. All right. The U.S. has always been a center of good innovation. We're seeing tons of innovation in the commercial space activities right now. Like I said, the main thing the government needs to do is buy the stuff that works. Buy the stuff that's of value to us. Then that will continue to feed this whole commercially driven space innovation ecosystem that's going to be super valuable in the future. Because the thing is, you cannot write down and do centralized planning to figure out what the most innovative and best technology of the future is going to be. You've got to just have a system where you've got all these entrepreneurs out there trying to think of ideas, testing them out, and iterating. And that's where I say embrace the chaos, because it leads to the best innovation. It makes sure that you have the idea that the ideas that emerge lead you down the right path, not just the fast path. Centralized planning is way faster, but it's not always right. And so embracing this innovation ecosystem that's a little bit chaotic helps us as a nation make sure that we're going to always have the best technology. And so doubling down on that, I think is key to deterring conflict and maintaining our advantage over China. So that's the innovation part. Now, the second thing is really doubling down on the openness. And so I do think this is at risk. And so one of our secret tools that has been super effective is universities and university research. And one of the things that I learned when I was a grad student, getting my PhD, is that everything I did was built upon not just a few little tidbits of knowledge that were pulled together, but a worldwide body of knowledge from other researchers that were also working in this field. And when we could feed off of all of that, we could always maintain a slight advantage in that. And that is how we've been able to innovate. One of the ways we've been able to innovate in this country so effectively is because of this robust university research and the fact that it's not all done in closed classified area, but it is open and collaborative, and it makes it much better and faster. And so there is a risk that people feel, some feel like, oh, we need to do our research in classified area. We need to classify more of our basic research so that we don't give away our secrets to China. And I think that is a valid concern, but I think that needs to be weighed against the benefits of working on open basic research, which are substantial and has been a competitive advantage of the United States for many decades. So that just needs to be carefully managed, the various risks and opportunities that we face in the research and development area, and balancing the openness versus protecting our secrets. So there's no easy button there, but it's something that needs some careful thought and management, and it is a key to maintaining our advantages against China. And then the third thing that I think we're really good at and we can kind of double down on is knowing our adversary. So if we know, the more we know, and this goes back to Sun Tzu, of course, but if you know your enemy, then you're going to be much able to counter them more effectively. And I would go so far as to say that we're in a place now where our adversaries, China and Russia in particular, they have a lot of good ideas. And when they have good ideas, why don't we copy them? There should be no pride in that, in us being the fast follower when it makes sense for us to do that. And so I think knowing your adversary and not being and acknowledging that they might have some good ideas that are worthy of our consideration is something that would benefit us too, because we don't have any corner on all the best ideas. So if we can keep the innovation stuff going, balance openness with the need to protect the most critical secrets, and then really know our adversaries and counter them in the ways that are going to be most effective, then I think we'll continue to be able to deter conflict and stay ahead in this competition. That doesn't mean there aren't a lot of challenges with scaling manufacturing and all this stuff, but I would lump those into the category of those are known things that we know we need to work on. The three things I mentioned are sort of things that I think we also need to pay some attention to.
Okay, very good. The bit about seeing somebody, an adversary, an opponent using something, developing something, going, hey, we should use that, and not being offended or embarrassed about it. I mean, I'm thinking about my episode from years ago now, and Albert Kahn, who was an American engineer, architect of factories who went over to the Soviet Union and basically led a giant technology transfer to get the Soviet Union manufacturing base, a whole bunch of factories that him and his team set up. And if the Stalinists can accept it, Stalinists called these things intellectually neutral. Meaning we could, they're capitalist tools. No, they're intellectually neutral. He can classify them that way and pick them up. We can certainly do the same in reverse, right? So that's fine. Okay, well, excellent. So since you retired from the military, you've started your own consulting business, and I'd like to hear what you're doing in that, who the kind of people you'd like to connect with, are and who you think you could help best and how to contact you.
Sure. Well, something that I kind of stumbled into near the end of my career was that on the government side, at AFRL and then working on especially the Space Force architecture stuff in the Pentagon, I helped a lot of companies figure out how their technology could best be used by the DoD. And so that's the go-to-market with new technology, if DoD is one of your customers, is a skill that I developed over many years in the government service. And I found out a lot of people have approached me and they want that same kind of help on the private side. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm doing for some startup companies and some large companies to help them figure out how to best capture government business. And the key thing is to translate their technology into the right military utility metrics, and then being able to explain that military utility to the right customers on the government side. And that's something that go-to-market stuff is something that I found I'm good at, and I'm doing some consulting in that area. I found that I have some private equity customers where they, for as part of their due diligence, want to assess the potential value of a company and the company's technology and their intellectual property and stuff. And so that's another thing that, since I've seen so many different companies and technologies during government service, that I can add some value in that part of it as well. And then the third thing that I seem to be contacted a lot about is Golden Dome. I mean, nobody knows exactly what it is, but everybody wants to have a piece of it. And I will say, one of the first things I did when we got the Golden Dome announcement or directive 6 months ago or so, was I went and dusted off all the the brilliant pebbles and all the historical work that's been done in that area to see what's different now. And the conclusion that I came to, which is what I think it's the general government consensus now, is that that technology is mature and can be built. The costs were prohibitive in the past, and the costs are not as prohibitive now. The space-based interceptors are the big missing piece. So yes, you want to accelerate all the other stuff that's going to help provide parts of the system, but the space-based interceptors are a big missing piece. And what's needed to develop those, and what do the characteristics of those need to be? Some system engineering work needs to go into that. But there's no doubt that building the pieces of Golden Dome is going to be one of the most important opportunities for DoD and space suppliers and vendors over the coming decades. So people seem to want some help with that, and certainly I'm able to assist with that. And then also the how do you tie it all together, and the command and control, and how that's all going to work. Those are non-trivial system engineering challenges that apply to the Golden Dome system as well. So those seem to be the areas where people are most interested in working with me, and happy to work with all kinds of clients in those areas. So appreciate the opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, I think your vision from inside the organization and how to navigate it is one of those most important things, because it's a mystery to everybody outside, right? So best way to contact you over LinkedIn or some other way?
But LinkedIn seems to work well, and very visible there. So
great. Okay, well, thank you for an articulate and open conversation. I really appreciate it. This has been Colonel Eric Felt, and I guess maybe we'll have another discussion a year from now or something like that and see what's changed. But thanks for doing that.
That sounds great. Again, I really appreciate the time, and fun to talk about these important topics with you.
Hey, my thanks to Colonel Felt for joining us today, and also thank you for listening in, and I hope you got a lot out of it. I don't do this for monetization. I think that's pretty obvious. I don't have a Patreon. I don't need to be paid to create this content. I go out and I find and make these relationships on my own. And so the way that you can show your support is by giving this podcast a 5-star rating on iTunes or whatever platform you're listening to it on. Or if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment, or definitely leave a like. It's a simple little thing. It takes a second. It takes me 4 to 7 hours to put together that opening minute montage of getting the writing together, getting the video clips, And usually I'll have to grab something that's like 4 minutes long or something for a 2-second little chunk of it or something that I have to pick out. Okay, there's a lot of work that goes into these things beyond merely getting the guest and often making the sale, because I frequently get guests who have not been on the interview circuit. These are not professional interviewees, right? And so I have to make the sale of getting them to be a guest. It is not easy. Nothing about this is easy, and I've been doing it for 6 freaking years. So please, if you have a chance, hit that like button, show your support, and if you are interested in creating a space startup or have one, go over to Amazon. There'll be a link in the description on YouTube, and grab your copy of The Evolution of Space Entrepreneurship. It's an important book. It teaches you the perspective of these critical people, investors, subject matter experts, successful business founders who have done it, who know what it takes to win. And they will show you what it is that you've been missing in the sort of putting the puzzle pieces together of creating a successful space business, right? And I know it all ends up with being bought out by one of the primes, and that kind of sucks right now. Like, nothing against the primes, but why do we have to have a business model that's that way? That's not really a commercial space business, is it, right? I eventually want to see a bunch of independent space businesses and not reliance on, a handful of primes. And they won't like that, but you should, because I want you to have more power in this relationship. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you soon.